Hello! In the following, I would like to discuss why applicants might still wish to consider filing a demand for international preliminary examination. I would first like to give you a bit of a historical perspective on this issue. Then I would actually like to talk about cases where I would feel it does not really make sense to file a demand for international preliminary examination. And then, of course, at the end, I would like to give you a few considerations which applicants should make when deciding whether or not to file a demand. So, historically, what has happened? Basically, before 2004, it was standard practice to file a demand almost in each and every case that an international application has been filed. But things have changed considerably, namely because there was an important change in the PCT system which changed the time limit to enter national phase from what used to be 20 months to 30 months, even without the need to file a demand. So all those applicants that used to file demands, predominantly because they wanted to gain additional time to enter national phase, they have since stopped to file demands, and we could really see that the number of demands has gone down considerably. In fact, there are only 3 countries left which at the moment still apply a 20-month time limit, but these states are also part of regional arrangements, and if you designate them as that regional arrangement, you actually have the 30-month also for all of those states. So really, in principle, one could say everyone is covered now by the 30-month time limit. Before 2004, we had about 80% of cases where demands were filed. Now, I would say we're down to 10 to 15% of cases where demands are filed today. So let me first of all discuss some of the cases where I would feel it does not really make much sense to file a demand. If you, for instance, receive what we call an Article 17 declaration, that's a declaration by the International Searching Authority that no search report will be established. Well, in this case, since the PCT regulations provide that an IPA is not obliged to do an examination on claims which haven't been searched, well, if you didn't get a search report, the IPA will most likely declare that no examination can be done either. So no point spending the money to file a demand in this particular case. Imagine also a case where you received a search report and there were only A citations in the search report. A citations means this is a citation about general state of the art, but which doesn't in itself affect novelty or inventiveness of your claimed invention. So in other words, everything seems to be okay. Everything seems to be in very good order, so why file a demand if you already received a very positive report from the International Searching Authority? Unless, of course, if you really wish to file Article 34 amendments for a particular reason, but also in this case I would argue no point in filing a demand. If you're not really ready to further discuss your case with the examiner at the IPA, and by this I mean you're not ready to file amendments under Article 34, you're not ready to file any counter-arguments against any of the objections raised in the search report and the written opinion, well, don't file a demand. Because what will happen in this case, if you file a demand, you will get a final report from the IPA, which is the IPRP Chapter 2, the International Preliminary Report on Patentability under Chapter 2 of the PCT, but that report will actually be identical to the written opinion of the ISA, so you spend all the money that you need to pay for filing of a demand, but you will not actually receive anything else other contents-wise as the written opinion which you have already received. Imagine also a case where you receive a very late search report. Yes, the rules stipulate that you have 3 months from the date of mailing of the search report and the written opinion to still file a demand. But imagine a case where you only receive a search report very close to 30 months or even after the 30-month time limit. You do have the right to still file a demand, but what will you do with the final report if it only gets to you, let's say, at 40 months from the priority date, when you're already well within the national phase and the processing of your application has already started? Probably also, I would say, a case where filing a demand would not seem to make all that much sense anymore. Another situation I would like to briefly mention is the case where there was a decision by the ISA that there's lack of unity of invention. More than one invention in your application, but you did choose not to pay any additional search fees. So part of your claimed invention did not get searched by the ISA. Well, in this case, if you file a demand, don't expect that you will get an examination report on those parts which haven't been searched, because as I said earlier, under the regulations of the PCT, it is acceptable that an IPA declares we will not do preliminary examination on claims which haven't been searched. And maybe just again as a last point, if you're really for whatever reason interested in patent protection for Luxembourg, Tanzania or Uganda. Those are the 3 states which still do not apply the 30-month under Chapter 1, but the 20-month time limit as in the old days. Well, if you're really interested in patent protection in these countries, you always have the option to enter into the regional phase at 30 months or even 31 months, either before the European Patent Office, which covers Luxembourg, or before a REPO, which covers Tanzania and Uganda. So really, for me, that would also be not a case that's worth considering filing a demand over. So now after all this negative, how about some of the cases where maybe you could consider filing a demand? And my response here is it really depends, but I would at least like to give you a few considerations which you should also go through in your mind. Now, one of the first considerations to make is, do you have any need to make Article 34 amendments? Because remember, only when you file a demand are you entitled to file Article 34 amendments. There's another possibility under the PCT to amend your application, that's under Article 19, but that allows you only to amend the claims of your international application. Article 34 allows you to amend all parts of your international application. So if you are interested in fixing, in clarifying something which would be good then for all the elected offices later on, well, why don't you do it during the international phase under the Chapter 2 procedure, and then it's done for all of the offices. Probably a lot will also depend on the number of countries where you consider entering the national phase. If you're an applicant who really only wishes to enter national phase in 1 or 2 countries, well, maybe leaving everything to the national phase, amendments, also arguing your case before each and every of those designated offices, if there are only 2, that might really not be much of a problem. But imagine you are in a situation where you're planning to enter the national phase in about 20 countries. Then maybe doing it centrally makes more sense in particular cases than waiting until you are in the national phase. One advantage of doing it during the international phase is that you as the applicant or the agent of the applicant, you can stay in control of what's happening in your particular application. You can argue the case as you like it with the IPA, and that could be a benefit. Again, of course, if the number of countries where you're entering national phase is very small, then maybe this might not be such a big benefit. Also, another important consideration probably is to look at what are the objections which are really raised in the search report and the written opinion. Are they minor in nature or are they major? If they're minor in nature, maybe they're easy to address during the Chapter 2 procedure, during international preliminary examination, and then you have it fixed and you're ready to go into the national phase where things hopefully are easier because of the work you've already done during the international phase. However, if you have major problems, maybe there's simply not enough time during the relatively short time limits which are available to the IPA during the Chapter 2 procedure to address all those issues. And also it could happen that maybe you're not successful during the Chapter 2 procedure, so you're still stuck, so to speak, with a problem. Another issue in this respect to consider is that maybe if you are addressing the issues raised by the searching authority and the IPA, while you may be complying with a relatively high standard, which you don't necessarily need to comply with all the designated offices where you're entering the national phase. And it might lead to situations where maybe you narrow your claims so much that they're acceptable for the IPA, but they could be broader and left broader for various national offices. And that might be an argument to rather leave these things until national phase entry and not do it centrally during the international phase. And a very last consideration that you should also keep in mind is PPH, the patent prosecution highway. So if you're entering the national phase in an office that participates in PCT PPH and you want to use a PCT product, the written opinion or the IPRP chapter 1 or 2, to speed up the national processing under the PPH scheme, then basically this might also be a consideration why you might wish to file a demand, because maybe what you received from the International Searching Authority is not yet in a state where it can be used to request the patent prosecution highway processing. In other words, you still need to work on getting at least one of the claims to be accepted by the IPA as novel and as inventive, and thus be able to rely on the patent prosecution highway. So in conclusion, I hope this gave you a nice little overview of some of the considerations that an applicant should make at the point of time when he needs to decide whether he wants or does not want to file a demand for international preliminary examination. There are some clear cases where I explained that it doesn't really make sense to file a demand, and otherwise there's really no right or wrong. But the important thing is give it some thought.